The rain had started just as Eric stepped onto the sidewalk, the kind of cold Chicago drizzle that seeped into your clothes and stayed there. He pulled up the collar of his jacket and kept walking, his eyes scanning the rows of shops for something worth exploring. The city had never felt lonelier than it did that night, a strange emptiness hanging in the air, as if the world had momentarily forgotten it existed. Then he saw it. The bookstore sat between a laundromat and a tax services office, a narrow little place that he was sure hadn't been there before. Its window display was dimly lit, the sign above the door faded beyond readability. Something about it felt off, but in a way that intrigued him. He had always been drawn to the unusual, and something about the place called to him. Without thinking, he stepped inside. A soft chime rang out as the door swung shut behind him. The air smelled like aged paper and dust, the kind of scent that made you feel like you'd walked straight into the past. Shelves stretched high, their wooden frames sagging under the weight of countless books. There was no organization that he could see, no sections marked, just an overwhelming number of books stacked haphazardly. He wandered deeper, running his fingers along the spines as he went. The titles were unfamiliar, many of them handwritten rather than printed. Some had no titles at all. He had spent years visiting bookstores, new and used, but he had never seen anything like this. Then he found it, a book, thick and worn, with a dark green cover that felt strangely warm under his fingertips. There was no title, just an intricate golden design pressed into the leather. He pulled it from the shelf, dust puffing into the air as he flipped it open. The first line stopped him cold. Eric Matthews had always believed that books could change lives. He just never thought one would end his. His breath caught in his throat. His own name. His own thoughts, written exactly as he had once expressed them in an interview years ago. He turned the page, his heart pounding. The story followed his life, from childhood to adulthood, detailing events with an unsettling accuracy. His first story, the one he had written at 10 years old about a spaceship lost in time. His college years, the late nights spent at his desk, chasing inspiration. His failed relationships, his biggest regrets. Every page was him. Then he reached the part he hadn't lived yet. Eric felt his hands tremble as he turned the pages. The book described things he had never done, places he had never been, and then something even stranger. A warning. Do not turn to the last page. He hesitated, his fingers frozen in place. His mind screamed at him to stop, but the curiosity was unbearable. With a deep breath, he flipped to the final page. The bookshop was gone.
Eric blinked. His breath came short, the paper beneath his fingertips suddenly cold. He looked around, expecting to see the wooden shelves, the dusty corners, the endless rows of books, but there was nothing. He stood in the middle of an empty lot, surrounded by cracked pavement and scattered leaves. The rain had stopped. The night was quiet. He turned the book over in his hands, but it was different now. The green cover had turned black, the gold design gone. He tried to open it, but the pages were blank. Every single one. His pulse pounded in his ears as he looked up and down the street. The laundromat was still there. The tax office, too. But the bookstore, the place he had stepped into only minutes ago, was nowhere to be seen. Eric's stomach twisted. He glanced down at the book again, and for the first time, he noticed something new. The last line. The only words remaining in the entire book. The story always ends the same way, and just beneath it, in ink that was still drying, his own voice whispered the words into his mind as he read them. The bookstore was gone.